It was the most ordinary morning Japan had seen in weeks. August 5th, 1945, the sun rose over Hiroshima the way it always did, slowly, gently, painting the Oda River gold. Children walked to school. Streetcars rattled through downtown. Soldiers ate breakfast. A city of 350,000 people went about their lives, completely unaware that they had less than 24 hours left. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, a bomber was being loaded with a single weapon. One bomb, one city, a countdown that had already begun. To understand what happened in those final 24 hours, you have to understand what Hiroshima was. It wasn't just any Japanese city. It was one of Japan's most important military command centers, headquarters of the Second Army, a major naval port, and a transportation hub that kept the Pacific war machine running. The Americans knew exactly what they were targeting, and they had been waiting for the right moment for months. But the people living there, they had no idea. For most residents, August 5th felt almost hopeful. American air raids had been hammering Japanese cities all summer. Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, reduced to ash. But Hiroshima had been largely spared. Some residents quietly whispered that perhaps the Americans were saving it for something. Others told themselves they were simply lucky. They were not lucky. On the other side of the world, the decision that would change history forever had already been made weeks earlier. President Harry S. Truman had authorized the use of atomic weapons against Japan on July 25, 1945, just 11 days before Hiroshima. The order sat in a classified folder, simple, cold, bureaucratic, a sentence that would end over 100,000 lives before the week was out. But the men who would carry out that order were only now on August 5th, making their final preparations. On the tiny island of Tinian, 1,500 miles south of Japan, the most secretive airbase in the world was buzzing with controlled tension. This was the home of the 509th Composite Group, a hand-picked unit of the best bomber crews in the United States Air Force, trained for one mission and one mission only. They didn't know the full picture. They just knew it was big. Bigger than anything any of them had ever done. Colonel Paul Tibbets had been living with this secret for over a year. He was 30 years old, a decorated bomber pilot. A man who had flown missions over North Africa and Europe, who had nerves so steady his crews called him Old Iron Pants. But even Tibbets admitted later that August 5th was different. There was a weight to it that no amount of military training could lift. That afternoon, ground crews carefully loaded the bomb into the belly of his B-29. They called it Little Boy. It was approximately 10 feet long, weighing nearly 10,000 pounds. It looked, by some accounts, almost unremarkable, like an oversized metal cylinder. But inside, it was a uranium core capable of an explosion equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT, more destructive power than every bomb dropped in the entire European theater combined. One plane, one bomb, one city. Tibbets walked around the aircraft slowly that evening. He didn't say much. What was there to say? Back in Hiroshima, the evening of August 5th was almost peaceful. Setsuko Thurlow was 13 years old. She had spent the day at school, doing the things 13-year-olds do, laughing with friends, complaining about homework, worrying about small, beautiful, ordinary things. That night, she ate dinner with her family. She had no idea it would be the last normal meal they ever shared together. Akiko Tokakura was 20, working as a bank teller. She finished her shift, met friends near the Aioi Bridge, a distinctive T-shaped bridge that American bombardiers had already selected as their aiming point, and went home to sleep. Sunao Suboi was 20 years old, a university student. He was in love. He had plans for the future. He went to bed that night thinking about a girl he liked and what he was going to say to her. These were not soldiers. These were not strategists or generals or weapons manufacturers. They were just people. Here's what makes the story even more haunting. There were warnings. On the morning of August 5th, American aircraft had dropped hundreds of thousands of leaflets over Japanese cities, including cities near Hiroshima, warning civilians that massive destruction was coming, urging them to evacuate. The leaflets named cities. They told people to leave. They were a last warning before the atomic age began. Most people never saw them. Those who did often couldn't believe them. Japanese military censors suppressed the leaflets when they could. State propaganda had been telling citizens for years that America was a paper tiger, brutal but ultimately defeatable. To believe the leaflets would mean believing that Japan was losing, and losing was unthinkable. So people stayed. Air raid warnings had become almost routine by August 1945. Earlier that morning, sirens had actually sounded over Hiroshima. American weather reconnaissance aircraft had passed overhead. The all clear sounded. People went back to sleep, back to breakfast, back to their mornings. Nobody panicked. The city went to bed on August 5th, trusting that tomorrow would come like every other day. At 2:45 a.m. on August 6th, the engines of the Enola Gay roared to life. Colonel Tibbets had named the aircraft after his mother, Enola Gay Tibbets, a woman he described as the one person who had always believed in him. It was a deeply human gesture aboard the most destructive machine in history. The crew was 12 men, 12 ordinary American men, a weaponeer, a bombardier, a navigator, tail gunners, flight engineers. They had been briefed. They understood what the bomb could do, at least on paper. But no human being had ever actually witnessed an atomic explosion outside of the test in New Mexico 3 weeks earlier. They were flying into something no one truly understood. The plane lumbered down the runway and lifted into the warm Pacific night, climbing slowly toward 31,000 feet. 3 additional aircraft flew alongside observation planes carrying cameras and scientific instruments. History needed witnesses. For hours, they flew north through darkness and then through dawn, crossing the vast emptiness of the Pacific. Inside the aircraft, the crew tried to stay calm. Some prayed, some wrote in journals, some stared at the ocean below and tried not to think too hard about what came next. At 7 a.m. in Hiroshima, the city was already awake. Streetcars were running. Markets were opening. The morning shift at the Mitsubishi factories had begun. School children were assembling in courtyards, standing in lines, reciting morning exercises. Radar operators had detected aircraft approaching. The warning siren had sounded, but it was only 3 planes. Standard reconnaissance, everyone assumed. Not worth a major response. The all clear was given at 7:31 a.m. People stepped back outside. At the Shima Hospital, just 80 meters from the aiming point at the IOI Bridge, morning rounds had begun. At Hiroshima Castle, soldiers were gathering for morning drills. Schoolgirls were assembling on the grounds of their school near the city center for their daily exercises. It was 8:14 a.m. In the sky above them, the bomb bay doors of the Enola Gay opened. At 8:15 a.m. in 17 seconds, Little Boy was released. It fell for 43 seconds. 43 seconds. The city had 43 seconds left. No one on the ground knew. There was no whistle, no warning sound that anyone could react to. Just morning air, morning light, the ordinary sounds of a city beginning its day. At 1,900 feet above the city, the bomb detonated. The explosion released energy equivalent to 16,000 tons of TNT in less than a second. The fireball reached temperatures of several million degrees, hotter than the surface of the sun. A shockwave expanded outward at nearly the speed of sound, followed by a pressure wave that flattened everything within a mile radius. Within the first second, the Shima Hospital below the detonation point simply ceased to exist. Within the first minute, approximately 80,000 people were dead. The city of Hiroshima, its buildings, its streets, its streetcars, its schools, its hospitals, was gone. In its place, fire, ash, and a mushroom cloud rising 60,000 feet into the morning sky, visible for 400 miles. On the Enola Gay tail gunner, Bob Karen tried to describe what he saw. He said the city looked like a pot of boiling black oil. He could find no other words. There were no other words. Setsuko Thurlow was 1.8 kilometers from the blast. She survived. She was thrown into the air by the shockwave. When she regained consciousness, she was buried under rubble, in total darkness. She could hear other children around her, calling out. She crawled toward a small beam of light. She came out into a world that no longer resembled anything she had seen before. The streets were filled with people whose skin had been burned from their bodies. People wandering without direction. People whose faces were unrecognizable. She walked for hours through a city that had been transformed into something from a nightmare. Soon now, Suboy survived. He had been on his way across the city when the bomb detonated. He was thrown 30 meters by the blast. He would spend the next year in a hospital, would carry radiation sickness for the rest of his life. He would live to be 96 years old and spend every one of those remaining years speaking publicly about what he had seen, what he had survived, and what he believed must never happen again. Akiko Takakura survived. She was one of the closest survivors to the hypocenter, only 300 meters away. She later described seeing three colors that morning: black, red, and gray. Black for the darkness that descended immediately after the explosion. Red for the blood and the fire. Gray for the ash that fell like snow. Gray snow in August. The world didn't understand what had happened for several hours. Early news reports from Japan described an enormous explosion in Hiroshima. The scale was unclear. The Japanese military couldn't reach the city. Communications had been severed completely. Reconnaissance planes flying over saw only a massive cloud of smoke and dust. It was only when President Truman made his public announcement hours later that the world learned a new phrase: atomic bomb. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. On August 15th, Japan surrendered. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, was over. But what had ended the war had also opened a new chapter in human history. A darker, more terrifying one. Hiroshima became something more than a tragedy, became a warning, a symbol of what human beings were now capable of doing to each other. The atomic age had begun, and there was no closing that door. Today, Hiroshima is a city again. It has a river. It has schools. It has children who laugh and eat breakfast and worry about ordinary things. The Peace Memorial Park stands near the hypocenter, a quiet, deliberate reminder. The atomic bomb dome, the skeleton of one of the only buildings that survived, still stands exactly as it was, preserved by choice, so no one forgets. Setsuko Thurlow went on to become an international disarmament activist. She spoke at the United Nations. She co-accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons in 2017. She was 85 years old at the podium, and her voice didn't shake. She said, "I want you to feel what I felt, to see what I saw, and to make a different choice." The 24 hours before Hiroshima were 24 hours in which the world was still whole. 350,000 people woke up on August 5th not knowing they were living through the last ordinary day. They made breakfast. They kissed their children. They went to work. They had plans, small, beautiful, human plans for a future they believed was coming. We carry that day with us now, not just as history. It's a responsibility. Because the technology that erased Hiroshima in 43 seconds still exists. It is still pointed at cities, still ready. And the only thing standing between then and now, between that morning and ours, is the choice we make. Every day to remember. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to go deeper into the forgotten stories of World War II, our next video covers the 72 hours that led to Japan's surrender and the internal power struggle inside Tokyo that almost stopped it from happening. Subscribe, because history isn't just the past, it's a mirror.